So those two goals, you would think we wouldn't be seeing a new power plant in Connecticut, but very contradictorily, State Department of Energy and Environmental Protection continues to issue permits for this plant.
It was a night of rampage against the Jews carried out in 1938 by the Nazi equivalent of the Proud Boys.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Maine to New York City and points west. Yesterday, news broke that 2020 tied 2016 for the warmest year in the world on record. Climate scientists had predicted that the cooling waters of the Pacific, called La Nina, would keep temperatures down last year, but it didn't happen. Greenhouse gases won out. Against this background, the awful project for another fracked gas power plant in Connecticut is advancing. Later in the program, I'll show some young people who protested at the state capitol about it. But first, we'll talk about this subject with a leader of Sierra Club, Connecticut.
As we are greatly concerned about this Killingly fracked gas power plant, we'll be speaking to Sam Dynowski. She's the state director of Sierra Club, Connecticut. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So good to be here with you, Stan.
All right. Well, so what's the story now? It looks grim as far as I can tell. How far along is this Killingly gas power plant?
Well, I can start at the beginning. In 2016, a company called NTE Connecticut LLC proposed to build this power plant in Killingly, Connecticut. It would be run on fracked gas. The proposal went to the Connecticut Siting Council, where it was rejected. It was proposed a second time and rejected a second time. And on its third try, the company proposed the plant again in February of 2019 to the Siting Council. It cleared an auction undertaken by ISO New England to provide power to the region. It upped its megawatts to 650 megawatts and was, despite the efforts at the Siting Council level, approved by the Siting Council in June 2019. Since June 2019, the plant has yet to be constructed, and there's been really an outcry from the moment it was approved until now from activists and concerned citizens around Connecticut. So where it's at right now is that there are several permits outstanding, as well as a Supreme Court case opposing the Siting Council decision, which are all expected to be resolved in the next few months. And then what happens from there, we'll only know when we hear what those decisions are.
So the permits look like they're going to get approved, and then legally there's nothing to stop it.
Of course, we'll explore every avenue to stop this plant, and have been doing so since its approval in June 2019. Unfortunately, it's really a contradiction with Connecticut's own climate goals and our governor's goals for clean energy. Connecticut passed the Global Warming Solution Act, which requires, under state statute, that we reduce emissions in Connecticut by 45% below 2001 levels by the year 2030, and by 80% by 2050. And those goals are really in alignment with the science. We understand, the reductions that are necessary in greenhouse gases in order to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. In addition, Governor Lamont issued Executive Order 3, which calls for 100% zero carbon emission electricity generation in Connecticut by 2040. So those two goals you would think we wouldn't be seeing a new power plant in Connecticut, but very contradictorily, State Department of Energy and Environmental Protection continues to issue permits for this plant. And that is really something that we're going to have to address, making sure that our department actually complies with the laws we have on the books when it's considering issuing permits. Otherwise, we expect we'll see more proposals like this.
Well, I mean, these people are smart. They know the science. They know we've got to cut back carbon emissions in half, let's say, by 2030. I mean, DEEP, Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, they had to approve this stuff. How could they do it?
Yeah, I agree. They are smart and they do know the science, but unfortunately, each permit is looked at a very narrow window and doesn't have the requirement that they comply with things like the Global Warming Solution Act and Governor Lamont's Executive Order 3, which is really a measure we need to put in place. It's something that New York...
Let me stop with that. These people don't have to consider the doom that's approaching us in 2030.
Correct.
Okay, great environmental protection. All right, I cut you off.
Yeah, super problematic. In New York, last year passed, or I guess it's 2019 now, in 2019 passed a landmark piece of climate legislation that does require their state agencies to comply with the law, with every permit, every contract, every grant that they put out. It's a measure that we really should have in Connecticut, and this Killingly plant is the prime example of why they need to have it.
Now, what about DEEP? Were these people appointed for life 30 years ago? I mean, who appoints these people?
No, so the commissioner of DEEP, Katie Dykes, is appointed by the governor. So she has her position at the leisure of the governor and the pleasure of the governor. He can appoint who he wants.
So the whole DEEP could be fired tomorrow and reappointed.
Well, the appointed positions could be, correct.
Yeah. And what has Governor Lamont said? I mean, I interviewed him on camera last year sometime, and he said, well, we don't really need this, but it's sort of the regional requirement, and we'll see, we'll study this. I haven't heard him say another thing.
Yeah, there's been pretty tremendous public pressure, so he said a lot of things about this plant, including he would do everything he could to make sure it doesn't move forward because he doesn't think we need it, that he would look through everything that he does as governor through an environmental lens. So there's been some strong words, but not equally strong action. And so we really want to see action at this point. And there's plenty of examples from around the country of actions that have been taken and could be taken. I'll name a couple. Governor Jay Inslee in Washington in 2019 issued a directive, which I think is like an executive order here in Connecticut, that all proposed fossil fuel plants be analyzed for their full climate impacts, including life cycle emissions. That's incredibly important because a gas power plant not only emits carbon right where it is and from its combustion, but because the science is telling us that leaks from fracking and from pipelines that will serve this plant are accelerating the climate crisis. Another example is from North Carolina. The North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality in August of 2020 rejected a pipeline, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, saying it did not meet what they wanted for the future and their clean energy needs. And the head of that department, Michael Regan, is now Joe Biden's appointment for head of the EPA.
Well, if Lamont is just going to be like a sphinx and not say anything, or more importantly, not stop this, can the legislature do something? Can they pass a law saying no more, it's an emergency, no more fossil fuel construction?
Yes, they can, and I hope they will. There was some interest in considering a bill in 2020, and pandemic happened, and we didn't see anything rise to the surface. But I hope in 2021, given the experience we've had with this plant, that they will indeed do that. It's really in my view, the only way we're going to be able to meet our greenhouse gas emission goals in the electricity sector. And while Killingly is kind of the prime example, DEEP has also approved permits as recently as the end of 2020. They approved permits for 375 megawatts of fossil fuel generation in Middletown. In 2018, they approved much less, but still fossil fuel generation, 10 megawatts in Bristol, Connecticut. And they've been permitting the University of Connecticut for new fossil fuel infrastructure. So I really think it's, I think the legislature in Connecticut has been pretty proud of the clean energy work they've done. But we can build all the clean energy in the world, and if we don't proactively take actions and measures to dial back fossil fuels, and at a minimum, just stop building new ones, we will have gotten nowhere.
So at this point, one of the big things that could be done is for people to call their members of the legislature and say this is an emergency and you've got to do something.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much for talking with me.
All right, so good to be here.
Now to the Capitol in Hartford, Connecticut, where the group Sunrise was to stage a rally and die-in. However, the steps where people usually speak from was off limits because of an orange fence installed after the attempted coup in Washington. The die-in of 20 to 30 people on the Capitol grounds was done to symbolize the loss of human and animal life that will occur because of climate collapse, which in part will be caused by another fracked gas power plant in Killingly.
Scream loud if you love clean air!
We love clean air!
Scream loud if you love clean water!
Clean water!
Scream loud if you love protected land!
Protected land!
The people united will never be defeated! Repeat after me. The people united will never be defeated! The people united will never be defeated!
My name is Senna Wazer. I'm a 17-year-old climate justice advocate, the co-director of Sunrise Connecticut, and a junior at UConn. I wish that we didn't have to be standing out here today in the freezing cold, in the middle of a global pandemic. I wish my winter break wasn't devoted to fighting different fossil fuel infrastructure. But more than anything, I wish that Governor Lamont, that the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, I wish that they actually cared about the Black Lives Matter movement, about economic and social inequality, and about climate change, which fuels all of these other injustices. I have a younger sister. Sometimes we talk about the future. We talk about getting an apartment together when she's in college. We're living close to each other, like my mom and her sister, once we graduate. But sometimes I wonder how many of these experiences will I actually get to have? Will I end up spending my time constantly fighting politicians, demanding that they revisit their messed up priorities and challenge systems of power and oppression?
We shouldn't have to be here, but alas, here we are.
and I must thank you all for joining us today in order to help call upon our Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and Governor Lamont and our state legislature in order to do the right thing and stop this plant. Perhaps the best case against Killingly has been made by the governor himself. During the governor's remarks from his 2020 State of the State address, he said, and I quote, "Without leadership from Washington, it is up to us and neighboring states to solve problems. Here in New England, we know that economic growth goes hand in hand with protecting our environment against pollution and climate change. Our promise is to hold you, as well as every member of our government, is to hold them accountable to their words and their actions on all fronts. We saw last week in Washington what happens when we don't. Our democracy is fragile, and the younger generation is the key to fixing our uniquely American mess. When the topic of Killingly has been raised, the governor has issued some direct statements on such. He said, and I quote, "I said, forget it. We are zero carbon on our energy grid in 2040. If you, our neighboring states, will commit to do the same thing over the next 20 years, we all agree that we wouldn't need this Killingly plant. So, I'm going to be pretty tough when it comes to these negotiations. I will step in. I'd like to find a way that we don't need a new power plant in Killingly," said the governor. "Governor, we are here to ask you to do just that, to step in, today and now.
We must liberate America from fossil fuel." Now, I have no control over the Killingly plant. I'm here in that sense as an ordinary citizen, but I can pledge to you as a United States Senator, I will be fighting for the Green New Deal in Washington, D.C. Activism at the local level is what will win this fight for us. And I am looking forward to a sunrise in Washington, D.C., a new day in Washington, when we appreciate that we need to end dependence on fossil fuels.
After the event, I spoke for a few seconds to Senator Blumenthal about the campaign to save Remington Woods, the 400-acre woods and water in Bridgeport, owned by DuPont, which wants to develop it. That means tearing down acres of mature trees, which are nature's own carbon capture devices. For that reason, it shouldn't happen. Not when we have just 9 years to cut down world carbon emissions in half. About the insurrection. I'm sure many of you have seen the video by former Republican Governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm going to show you 2 small sections. This is how it begins.
As an immigrant to this country, I would like to say a few words to my fellow Americans and to our friends around the world about the events of recent days. Now, I grew up in Austria. I'm very aware of Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. It was a night of rampage against the Jews carried out in 1938 at the Nazi equivalent of the Proud Boys. Wednesday was the day of broken glass right here in the United States.
He compares last week's insurrectionists to German Nazis. And then, incredibly enough, he talks about his own father and neighbors in Austria and how hatred and later guilt twisted their lives.
Growing up, I was surrounded by broken men drinking away their guilt over their participation in the most evil regime in history. Not all of them were rabid anti-Semites or Nazis. Many just went along, step by step, down the road. They were the people next door. Now, I've never shared this so publicly because it is a painful memory. But my father would come home drunk once or twice a week, and he would scream and hit us and scare my mother. I did not hold him totally responsible because our neighbor was doing the same thing to his family, and so was the next neighbor over. I heard it with my own ears and saw it with my own eyes. They were in physical pain from the shrapnel in their bodies and in emotional pain from what they saw or did.
The response to the video has been terrific. It's been viewed on YouTube alone over 5 million times. Now, a great point about the accusation of fraud by the Stop the Steal mob. Regular people are mystified at the accusation of fraud. How could anyone claim fraud when the votes were so carefully watched and counted? But they don't understand what the Stop the Steal people mean by the word fraud. On the 13th, on Democracy Now!, Yale historian Timothy Snyder said, what Mr. Trump is saying when he won the election is that there was fraud. And by fraud, he means the reality that African Americans are allowed to vote. When he speaks in Milwaukee or Atlanta or Detroit, what he's saying is black voters, right? When he's saying I won, he's saying I won if you only count the votes of the real Americans. Snyder hits the nail right on the head. It's all pretty obvious that hate was at the core of the attempted coup. Now, I'm sure you've all seen this photo of a man with a huge Confederate flag, or this one of the noose with the Capitol in the background, or this one with the fellow who was wearing a neo-Nazi shirt making a so-called joke about Auschwitz. However, you probably didn't see this one with the Israeli flag at the rally. If the flag was carried by a Jew, the question is, how could he or she not notice the race hate at the rally and carry a flag of a country that claims it represents Jews? If it was carried by a non-Jew, how shameful it is for Zionists that a white nationalist sees the Zionist state as an ally. Buried in the news about the attempted insurrection and the second impeachment was a chilling outrage. The Trump administration, assisted by the U.S. Supreme Court, killed Lisa Montgomery, a victim of incest and rape. Her life experiences made her severely mentally ill. She was indeed guilty of a gruesome crime, but it's disgusting that she was executed. This is what her attorney said. The craven bloodlust of a failed administration was on full display tonight. Everyone who participated in the execution of Lisa Montgomery should feel shame. No one disagrees that Mrs. Montgomery was the victim of unspeakable torture and sex trafficking. No one can credibly dispute Mrs. Montgomery's long-standing, debilitating mental disease, diagnosed and treated for the first time by the Bureau of Prisons' own doctors. Our Constitution forbids the execution of a person who is unable to rationally understand her execution. The current administration knows this, and they killed her anyway, violating the Constitution, federal law, its own regulations, and long-standing norms along the way. Over the years, we've often shown video or quoted from reports by B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights organization. But this week, with a press release, they broke new ground.
This comes as leading Israeli human rights group B'Tselem is denouncing Israel's control of Palestinian territories as a single apartheid regime that violently perpetuates the supremacy of Israelis over Palestinians. In a statement, B'Tselem says, quote, "Israel is not a democracy that has a temporary occupation attached to it. It is one regime between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, and we must look at the full picture and see it for what it is, apartheid," they said.
For Palestinians and most of the left, this statement is pretty obvious. But in the Israeli context, with the vicious series of ever more right-wing governments, this is a brave statement. B'Tselem has until now confined itself to exposing the details of mistreatment and killings, but now it feels compelled to call out Israel for what it is, an apartheid regime. We've mentioned the calls for a worldwide protest of the Saudi-Obama-Trump war against Yemen. In Connecticut on Sunday, the 23rd, I'll be taking part in a panel at 3 p.m. called "The World Says No to War on Yemen," along with U.S. veteran Mitchell Link and Ibrahim al-Suraimi, the Imam of the Central Connecticut Islamic Association. The event is sponsored by Socialist Resurgence Connecticut. To register, go to thestruggle.org. That's our program for today. Stay safe, folks, but stay active. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.